Pastor John Woodin, and this is a ministry of Hollywood Faith Christian Center in beautiful Hollywood, Florida, on the Gold Coast of Florida. This morning we're going to start in Daniel chapter 6. And it says this, "And now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and as in his upper room with the windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom." This is what he always did. It didn't matter who was against him or who was for him. And if you remember, his enemies bring charges against him and say, you know what, he doesn't pray to you, King Darius, and it's against the law. So you've got to do something about it, and you've got to follow the law. And unfortunately, reluctantly, King Darius gives the command that Paul must be thrown into the lion's den. Well, that would normally be a death sentence. But God, right? Your God, whom you serve continually, Darius says, he will deliver you. Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring. And then he says the king went to the palace and spent the night fasting, with no musicians were brought for him, and his sleep went from him. And then in the morning he ran out and asked Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? And what does Daniel say? Daniel says, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, my king, I have done no wrong before you. Wow. So we've got the angels coming and holding the mouths of the lions closed. Now that's a God intervention, a bona fide intervention by the hand of God to seal the mouths of the lions. And then, but why? What was that important? To save Daniel? No. The key is here, Darius then writes a decree that the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever, and he is God. So you can't say anything against him, and you can't come against him. Now, Darius does not become a believer. The Bible does not say that. But Daniel found great favor in the reigns of Darius and of King Cyrus. He finds favor. They do not become believers. Let's make that crystal clear. But God uses them greatly in this period of time because of the influence of Daniel. Daniel is an upright man, and they admire him. They don't become followers of his God, but they are just as well, because of, this decree from Darius. It says, and he delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, and who delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So it says, and Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Wow. These are incredible interventions of God, the same way he intervenes sometimes in our lives, where there's no explanation of what has happened other than God reached down and intervened. Jesus said to her in John 11, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Now he's speaking to Martha and remembering that, but Lazarus is dead. And they know that, and they know that he is in the tomb. And it's like, wow, Lord, you're really putting the pressure on us. But I am the resurrection. Don't worry about him. Didn't I tell you about the glory of God that would be manifest because of this? And he goes to the tomb and he says, take away the stone. And Martha, the sister of whom was dead, said to him, Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. Now, Sometimes in the Middle East, it gets to be, as in that part of Israel, over 100 degrees. And I am sure that he stunk. He was 4 days dead. They didn't have any embalming. The Jews did not embalm. And so he would have been seriously deteriorating. But didn't I tell you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? And she tacitly gives the permission for them to roll back the stone, and then he calls Lazarus out of the grave. Now, there are those who speculate that Lazarus was actually the rich young ruler, and that he couldn't give himself over because he had many possessions. And so he not only did he need to be saved, but he needed to be delivered. And when he's called out of the tomb, Jesus says, unbind him and loose him, because of the grave cloths that are used to bind up of the dead bodies, and he is restored. John 12 tells us that Lazarus was with Jesus and that the religious authorities wanted to kill them both. A tomb was discovered in Cyprus, on the island of Cyprus, and it said on it, Lazarus, 4 days dead, friend of Jesus. And he was thought to be one of the first bishops of Cyprus, commissioned by both Paul and Barnabas. So there's always a kingdom purpose for God's supernatural intervention. You say, well, what about Lazarus? No, he moved him so that he brings the gospel and becomes a bishop on the island of Cyprus. The Lord is near to all, Psalm 145, who call upon him in truth. He will fulfill the desire of those who fear him. He will also hear their cry and save them. The Lord preserves all who love him. Draw near to God, James says, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. I want to encourage you, and I believe that some of you, really, this is a word of the Lord for you for 2025. Enlarge the place of your tent, and let them stretch out the curtains of your dwellings. Do not spare. Lengthen your cords and strengthen your stakes. For you shall expand to the right and to the left, and your descendants will inherit the nations, and make the desolate cities inhabited. Do not fear, for you will not be ashamed, neither be disgraced, for you will not be put to shame. God will intervene and supernaturally in your affairs. That's what's going to happen. And I believe enlarge the place of your tent. And just as an indication, in 2 Kings chapter 4, it says that a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, and he says, your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord. And she warns him and says, look, and I've got no money, and the creditor's coming to take my 2 sons to be his slaves. So Elijah said to her, what do you have in the house? And she says, I just have a small jar of oil. He says, okay, go and borrow vessels from everywhere, from all your neighbors, empty vessels. Do not gather just a few. So, in other words, he doesn't tell her how many. He doesn't tell her how long this should go on. This theoretically could have gone on forever. And it's not until she runs out of vessels that the oil stops. And you can just imagine, if you could, that if she could just keep getting a supply of vessels, it would have never stopped. But then she's told to sell the oil and pay her debts, and she will. But God supernaturally intervened. But his grace is without measure. So he didn't stop them and say, get 20 vessels. He said, get as many as you can. Go everywhere. Go to all your neighbors. If she had continued, Who knows what could have gone on there? We have to do all we can, but leave room for a supernatural God to intervene. Ephesians 3 says that he would grant you, according to the riches of his glory, to be strengthened with might through his Spirit in the inner man, that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the width, length, depth, and height, to know the love of Christ, which passes all knowledge. I just want to take you one more place in Mark 16, when Jesus is taken to heaven, and it says, and they went out, the apostles, and preached everywhere, the Lord working with them and confirming the word through the accompanying signs. That's what he wants to do with you. He wants to work with you to create miracles. All we have to do is be a willing vessel to do what he asks us to do when he asks us to do it. God bless you.